Grab some coffee, a Mountain Dew, maybe both. A storm is brewing. The Brainstorm. Welcome to The Brainstorm with Matt and Mike.
Hey, welcome to The Brainstorm with Matt and Mike. It's a show where we use our decades of experience and working with clients here and there, hundreds and hundreds of clients that, as you can imagine, when you have that much experience, all kind of ups and downs are going to happen on a pretty regular basis. And so we try to use that experience to help business owners really kind of avoid, sometimes it's hard to avoid, but avoid some roadblocks, if you will, some hiccups in your business. So hopefully that does help our listeners and our viewers every now and then. But today I have a great guest on our show. As you guys know, anybody who's watched our show before, we like bringing guests on the show because, well, really, we leverage their experience and what's happening and what's not happening in order to better your experiences in life. Today on the show, I have a great friend of mine, Todd Carnes. He's been a friend of mine for many, many years. He's an author and speaker. I can't even list all the stuff that he's actually done and been involved in, but speaker, author, his new book, Burying Home Here, a memoir of a Mill Village missionary. Todd Carnes, thanks, buddy. I appreciate you joining us today.
Awesome. Glad to be here, man.
Great, man. I'm excited about this book that you've written. I'm really excited. You can see it here if you're watching on camera. If you're listening to the radio, you can't see anything, obviously. But we also release our show on social media, YouTube. You can go to thebrainstormradio.com and check it out. But, man, I'm really excited about this book. And it's using your experience. You know, we're talking about my show and all of the experience we use, but really it's just using your experience and over the decades of years that we've known each other, even longer than that, but
right,
that we've been really close friends. I've heard all about these experiences, and now you finally put these experiences in writing. You excited?
I'm pumped, man. I know that COVID kind of gave everybody some creative energy, and during the COVID time when everybody was at home, I finally found some space to try to reduce some of these things to writing. I've been married almost 27 years, and Carrie always said from day one, like, one day you're going to write a book, probably because I talk too much, but she was like, one day just sit down and write it. But I never wanted to write it until I had decades of experience.
Isn't it like because we do a lot of content writing here, it just seems to me like you turn. Have you ever seen the movie with Chevy Chase? What is it, Funny Farm or something like that? And he's going to be a writer, and he moves out to this farm, and he gets everything set up, and he gets this old school typewriter, and he sits there, and it's all perfect, right? Everything's perfect, and he sits there, and he just looks at it, looks at this blank white piece of paper, and don't know where to start.
Right.
Isn't that? I mean, how did you get over that? How did you get over that part? How did you get it started?
Hardest part of writing always is just getting started, like the first paragraph. And for me, in the back of my mind, I always wanted to do it. I just wanted to reduce some of these things to writing, and I read a book called Hillbilly Elegy. I don't know if you've read it, but this guy came from West Virginia, I think, and he talked about just some of the Rust Belt and growing up in that area. And he actually went on and got a degree from Yale, did a bunch of things. But when I read that book, it was impactful because I've been gone from the mill town where I grew up for 30 years or more.
Yeah.
But when I read that book, it was like that describes a lot of who I am.
Mm.
And so I actually made my wife read it. I mean, it was pretty rough.
I'm sure
the language was tough. Yeah, and I was like, babe, you have to read this book because as you read this book, you're going to understand more of who I am. Because we met in college. She's from Michigan. I'm from this mill town in Alabama City, and so she read it. She kind of labored through it. She didn't enjoy it nearly as much as I did, but the premise was there that it was it just reminded me of what it was like to grow up there. It reminded me of
the
uniqueness of those towns, the uniqueness of our family, just the way we lived. And I realized not a lot of people have experienced that in the world in which I live now. And I was like, I can write that book somewhat. And it was a very popular book. And I was like, I can write that book based on my experience.
Yeah.
And then I just kind of made a mental note, okay, I'm going to do that. And quite frankly, when COVID came around, I was making a transition. I had a little space in life. We were pulling Todd Realty out the ground. It was just had some freedom. And I just started writing. And once, somebody told me you got to write 80,000 words and, just doing word count. And then once you get to 20,000, you're just like, okay, I got to do it.
Yeah.
And so I wind up writing it from 10 p.m. till 2 a.m. You're just cranking and turning and burning. And then it was fun because I'm remembering and sharing stories that I haven't spoken in decades.
So this other book that you read, that helped give you the insight on the white blank piece of paper, how to get started. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And it also just showed me how impactful a personal story like that could be. Because when I read it, and I had a friend, Marcus, who gave it to me, and somebody else, Brian Kirkland, my good friend, he read it. Actually, both of us had our wives read it because we're just like, this is a lot of who I am.
Yeah.
And so I realized I can do that as well.
Yeah. Well, I like you answering that question because, let's face it, you probably know a ton of people. I know a ton of people, and people's like, I should write a book. How many times have you heard people say, I should write a book, or you should write a book? Somebody's even say, oh, you should write a book, right?
Right.
And it's almost, they use that in such a flippant type of, wording, right? And
right.
They just, oh, you should write a book. And so it's a lot harder than you think. But people have thought about it seriously, and that's the question, is how do you get started? So talk to me about this book specifically, Burying Home, a memoir of a Mill Village missionary. Why'd you write this particular book, and how did that come about it?
Yeah, my mom passed away about 20 years ago. My dad passed away about 3. And when my father passed away, I was blogging a decent amount then, and I wrote a blog called Burying Home, and it blew up, and it got thousands, if not tens of thousands of reads, because it was about this journey of when you bury your first parent, you still have home, but when you bury your second parent, you have to bury home. And when you bury home, it's a different kind of funeral. It's a different kind of feeling, because it's almost like when I buried my father and there was some relief there, but when you bury home, there's nothing but pain.
Right.
And so it was this thing that came to me. And so when I decided I was going to write my memoir, which really what I wanted to put down, when I got done, I was like, that's Burying Home. And I actually put the blog post at the end, and Memoir of a Mill Village Missionary just comes from the idea when we had my father's funeral. I went home. Fortunately, I was with my dad when he died, and he died in a hospice bed in our den in the house where we grew up. He's been there 50-something years. A 1,400 square foot ranch right there in the Mill Village area of Alabama City, and I remember being there with him. I remember my family coming down right after that and cleaning out that house with my brother and my 3 daughters. And when it was all over with, I put my 3 daughters in my car and I rode them through the Mill Village. And I said, your grandfather grew up right there in that little house right there. And he used to run from there to the school down here. And I was trying to give them some sense of their roots and their history, because they don't really know it.
No, and they really never will be able to understand it especially without you being able to do any of that. Man, I'm excited about diving deep into this conversation. You're listening to The Brainstorm with Matt and Mike. I got Todd Carnes, author and speaker, and a great friend of mine for multiple decades. And I'm looking forward to reading his book. I'm looking forward to this conversation we're having. He wrote this book here recently called Burying Home, a memoir of a Mill Village missionary. And I was just asking him, Todd, why you write this book? And he was telling me about burying home, and really not just the book called Burying Home, but truly burying home, as he buried his father and went back and took his family there. Todd, you were just telling me about how you went through the Mill Village that you kind of grew up in and was showing your daughters. Were they able to kind of understand and start visualizing any of that? Or is that just like so far removed from their lifestyle, it's even just difficult to understand it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wrote them through and it meant a lot to me. I wanted them to see and experience it, but I don't think it hit with them. But you know what hit with them is I took months and I labored and I wrote this book and I wrote down all those stories. And then my daughters are 19, 21, and 23, and I gave them the book. And when they read the book, the interesting thing is probably 70% of the material they didn't know. These are things that, you just don't. A lot of it is there's a lot of tragedy in there. It's not stuff you talk about at the dinner table.
Right.
And the book landed a lot more than the trip through the Mill Village, but all of that was really important to me because, my dad, he pulled us up out of the Mill Village, and I wanted to honor that. I don't want that story to be lost. I want that story to be honored because my kids, they grew up in the suburbs. They grew up in an entirely different scenario and for generations. Yeah. I want people to understand that, this thing started with a single mom in a mill house in the Mill Village, burning coal, trying to keep the lights on and working doubles.
A lot of folks that are listening to the show and watching us have this conversation, they don't even understand. They've heard the term Mill Village a lot growing up, probably, right?
Right.
That doesn't necessarily mean they understand what a Mill Village is.
Right.
That I definitely understand it because I grew up in a very similar scenario you did. I grew up in rural South Carolina. You grew up in Gadsden, Alabama, which is a very rural Alabama area. I graduated a class of 6 people. 6. Yeah. Hey, but I was valedictorian time. But 6 people.
Yeah.
So I grew up in rural South Carolina, as you might imagine. But how about explain to our viewers, listeners, what are we talking about? We keep saying Mill Village because we've said it a number of times.
Absolutely. And I assume people know that, but it's gone. But
yeah, it's not here anymore.
Exactly. But in my town, Dwight Manufacturing Industries, which was based somewhere in the New England states, they came down to a suburb really of Gadsden called Alabama City, Alabama, and they built a huge cotton mill. And to go around to the rural areas of Alabama and recruit workers, they built about 500 houses. They all looked very, very similar, but they had some various sizes. But they didn't have indoor plumbing initially. Everybody burned coal to stay warm. No air conditioning, just a fireplace. But they would go to these rural areas where, like my grandparents on one side, they went to school till the 3rd grade and that was it. And they just worked on the farm, and they would go to these farmers and they would say, hey, you can come work in this mill. And we have a doctor there where you can go to the doctor, and your kids can go to this school we're going to build, and you have guaranteed employment and a place to live. And they just recruited all these people to come work in these mills. And then they lived in this Mill Village environment, which was very communal. There was like a healthy community aspect to it. But make no mistake, it was hard work. It was a hard life.
Well, and it's a melting pot too, right? Because you bring people in, and different people, you get recruited to come into a Mill Village, but for different motives.
Right.
Right? Like they're motivated to do this differently, right? Some of them are financially. Some of them are, but I already know people that are down there that's working there. So, from a friendly perspective. But I bet you in those small little communities like that, while it had a community feel, there was probably a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Some crime, all types of things, right, that's going on in those little small towns.
Yeah, it's interesting because everybody knew everybody. And so they did have this sense of community where, like, everybody raised everybody's kids.
Right.
My dad would tell me all kinds of funny stories about how that went down. But literally, he'd say they got pushed out of the house in the morning with nothing on but a pair of shorts and no shirt, no shoes, and came in at night and, wash your feet, take a bath every 3rd or 4th day. But they kind of it's one of those deals where they're very poor, but they didn't know it. But they had really good friends.
Yeah, nothing to compare it to.
Exactly. But on the flip side, there was a lot of pain there. There was a lot of difficulty. There was a lot of those people were taken advantage of.
Right.
And there's a lot of violence. Like here in the suburbs, like it's kind of funny. I grew up in a place where violence was normative. Like you had to fist fight.
Oh, yeah.
It was just, my dad kind of raised me up, preparing me to fist fight. Because if you didn't fist fight, then, you couldn't get your man card. And it was just, in his childhood, it was very normative. In mine, it was very much that way as well. And so there's a different kind of feel and environment there, but the mill village still exists. All the houses are still there. It's kind of run down. They shut the mill down, I think, in the early 70s, maybe late 60s. I was born in 69, but I just, I always thought that was normal, same deal, until you get out and you realize not everybody grew up in a mill village.
Right.
And not everybody understands those roots,
Those small towns, how they are. Yeah, because you get your clique, you get your group, right? And they're really close. Right. I mean, you fist fight within that group too, but you're pretty close to that group. And then that group is against the other groups, right? And so, it was foundational as in those small towns. There's no doubt about it. So I'm looking at this cover of Berrien Home here, and and we're talking about a mill village, and I'm sitting here actually looking at a mill house on the cover of this book. Talk to me about the cover of the book and what all is going on, because in a simple picture there's a lot of weight to it too, right? And so talk to me about the cover of this book.
Actually, the interesting thing, the cover is actually my grandparents' house, which is out in rural Coleman County. So it's not a mill house, but my grandparents were born there, and that's where they were living when they were recruited to go to the big city and work in the mill village. Okay. And so if you could see this cover, you'll see that the house is actually built on stones. Yeah. Like they took a few rocks and laid them down, and that thing lasted over 100 years.
As their pillars.
Yeah, it lasted over 100 years. And again, when I would go there as a child, we were living there, and there was a lot of chaos in the house, and this was my mother's parents who lived out there, and they came and they worked in those mills for almost 30 years, and then they got out and went back to rural Alabama. And but I have a huge picture of that in my house, because I call it my safe house. Yeah. It was the place where we would load up and go, and there was no chaos there. There was no violence, there was no addiction, there was none of the craziness that was always at home. And when we would go out there, it was just, it was just beautiful, because as a child, you want to be in that place of comfort, safety, low anxiety. And there's a lot of stuff in the book that we just didn't have that. But when we went out there, we had that. And I understand my grandfather, like when he lived in the mill village and he was working those doubles, and and there's no air conditioning in these things. This is Alabama. There's no AC. They're blowing fans. These people worked hard. Yeah, no doubt. I think he drank hard after the fact, and he lived hard. Yeah. But as he got older and retired out there, he set all that aside, and they became the best grandparents in the world. And I've spoken about that before, just to remind grandparents, like, right, we need y'all. Right. We need y'all to be safe. We need y'all to be accessible. We need you a lot of times to cushion some of the other realities of life. And they did a great job of that. I mentioned in the book that sometimes I still dream. You have these dreams. I'm 51 years old. You have these dreams, and I dream that I'm there. And when I wake up after one of those dreams, I'm just depressed.
Yeah, disappointed.
Because I want to be back there. Yeah. That was the best place I ever had. Yeah. So the house means a lot to me. And as you know, I did about 12 covers, put them out on Facebook, and did kind of a poll, because I would have wanted that on there, but I just didn't think it would resonate with everybody. And it resonated. It won kind of 2-1.
Yeah, no, it resonates. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. That's funny that you say that, because what happens is even people that didn't grow up like that, it still resonates with them. Yeah. Well, I was telling someone else that was on our show recently that they were talking about the older generation. Excuse me. They were talking about the older generation, and I was like, the thing about the older generation, like our grandparents, and even before that, when you start thinking about that generation, there's words and terms that come to mind. It's dependability. Right. It is safe. It's work ethic. Right. I mean, it's perseverance. I mean, there's all types of things, and it's the things that most people even today want to be the characteristics of their workforce. Right. Right. I mean, tell me a company out there or a business owner out there that doesn't want those characteristics in their team. Right. Right. I mean, so, and it all is, in my opinion, it all came from this generation.
Yeah. And they were just tough.
Right.
Man, they were they were just a lot tougher than we are. And when we get into the missionary part, it's like I tell people there's missionaries, like I was a missionary where I moved to Russia and I lived there for 3 years, and there's some toughness there, but then there's the missionaries like the generation above me that flew into Bolivia and took a machete and hacked their way into the woods and built a house.
Right.
Like those people are a different class than what I was. And I think I look at my grandfather and those people, and their expectations of life were different. I mean, remember, they're coming off the farm where they had no dentist, they had no doctor. And sometimes they worried whether or not they were going to starve to death when, the weather didn't cooperate.
Right.
And so to go to a mill village and actually have a house and payment and you knew you were going to eat was like a huge step up. But, a lot of times they worked, 18-hour days. They doubled up. It was hard work, but I think one of the themes of the book is you really make an impact on your family if you look at it generation over generation.
Yeah.
Everybody wants they want that stuff to happen in a decade. And maybe if you're Bill Gates, you pull that off, but most of us, it's decade over decade over decade, and you can pull your family up, not only financially, but morally, and in a lot of different realms. And so I think that's some of our family story.
No doubt about it. You're listening to The Brainstorm with Matt and Mike. Today we have a guest, an author and speaker and great friend of mine, Todd Carnes. He recently wrote a book called Burying Home. It's a memoir of a Mill Village missionary. And we were just talking to him just about, those days. And we all have those days. We think back when we were children. Man, it was just different, right? It was just felt different. I mean, some of us had a really bad childhood. Some of us had a really good childhood. But even in the ones that was bad, you had those moments in life where you're like, I wouldn't mind going back to that moment just for a little bit. Right. And that's there's a lot of truth in that. And it's a lot of weight in that. It feels good to think about that. I know I can think of hundreds of moments that I'd like to go back and experience again. And time just gets by us. But he was just talking to us about that. But if you read the title of this book, Burying Home, a memoir of a Mill Village missionary, right? So he's not just talking about his past and his childhood. He went on to become a missionary, and that makes me smile because I know some of the stories that he endured as a missionary. So talk to us, Todd. I mean, after you did leave the small home, right, a small town deal, well, first, just because I know you so well, and this was probably not in the book. I don't know if it is or not, but it's probably not in the book. But I know you had a little stint there at Disney World as a lifeguard, right?
I did.
Yeah. Spent a little time lifeguarding there at Disney World.
It wasn't a bad gig. Like, we're from small town Alabama. Yeah. And funny thing I say in the book, like, everybody had to have a nickname.
Yeah.
Mine was Hot Dog. One of my good friends is Bullet.
Yeah.
And Bullet's mom knew somebody who somehow connected in Disney World and said we could go lifeguard. And it was just like on a whim.
Yeah.
Well, let's go do that. So we figured it out, finagled our way down there, spent a summer down there living in Snow White Village on Seven Dwarfs Lane. And we were in a double wide. They had double wides, kitchen in the center, 4 rooms on either side. Yeah. And we were crammed in there, but we had a great time that particular summer.
I bet.
And
that would be when you're looking back at your childhood. That'd be one of the moments I wouldn't mind going back. That
was a good one. That was a really good summer. And then right after that, I went to the University of Alabama and started my course there. And then really it was at University of Alabama where I was really following in the footsteps of just long lines of addiction in my family. Hit rock bottom right when I turned 21. And then had a faith experience. And so when I came to faith at college, it kind of turned my life on a dime, where I'd been just kind of in a race to the bottom, spiraling down, went from really good grades to failing grades, and just kind of losing all the capacity and ambition in life. Yeah. And I just had this great roommate who actually was from the Mill Village in Alabama, known him since Little League, and he really pulled me up. He really gave me hope when
you have to have somebody.
I was running out of hope. Absolutely,
there's somebody out there that's your saving grace.
100%. And you never know when you're going to be somebody's saving grace.
That's right.
And so you got to persevere. And so even in the front of the book, I talk about this book's written for like 15 people, and one of them is for somebody who has a friend who's spiraling down. And I say, don't give up hope.
Yeah.
Hang in one more year, because you never know when it's going to turn. And when it turns, for me, when it turned 180 and sent me off in a brand new direction towards 3 years of missionary service in Russia and seminary degree and church planning and a lot of things that were certainly not on the radar when I was spiraling down in
But you were in college, it was engineering, right?
Right.
I mean, that's where your education came from.
Yeah.
And then you went from there to Jacksonville, right? Then you go to become an engineer there.
I did. Yeah.
What kind of engineer was?
Civil engineer.
Civil engineer, yeah. So you worked in the like road systems and stuff like that.
Paving and drainage, yeah.
And so I know, but from there you went to Russia.
Right.
And so it was you and Carrie.
Yes.
Right. And that was it. You went over there just as a couple, a young couple.
Right.
How old were you then?
25.
And going into Russia.
Right. Never been out of the country. Never
going to Russia.
Hardly been
25
anywhere.
Years old. Hadn't been married, but how long?
A year.
A year. A year. Imagine our listeners, viewers. Imagine you guys, 25 years old, getting married 1 year, and you go to your spouse and you say, "Hey, we're gonna go be a missionary in Russia."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
that's a big.
That's not the bad part. Imagine how your in-laws feel about that.
That would be even worse.
My 23-year-old daughter just got married, and every time we do this, I just remember
that situation.
Like how shocking this must have been to my in-laws.
Yeah.
Hey, I just married your daughter, and we're going somewhere in Russia. Like, I don't even know where. It's kind of on the Far East side. Like, we'll figure that out. Oh man, they were patient with me, and we went. And so we got on that plane. I'll never forget it. We went through Alaska. And this was 1995. And so Russia had only been open about 3 years.
Yeah.
And it was still a little tenuous when you flew in there. We stopped in Alaska, you got your fuel, and then we went over and you fly across the Bering Straits, you land there. We landed at a military airport to refuel where they checked us out. It's called Anadyr. I'll never forget it. And we're sitting there on this plane of Alaska Air, maybe 120 people. This guy gets on and he looks just like Ivan Drago from the Rocky movies. He is huge, bulked up, blonde hair, kind of spiked back, and just walks up and down the plane in Russian military garb with an automatic. They call it automat, just to intimidate the heck out of everybody. And it worked. Carrie's sitting there and we're thinking, what have we got ourselves into? It's the middle of the winter, and that was our first taste of Russia. But it got a lot better after that. But looking back, it was, it looks courageous now. It was just naive at the time. But it was so formative in life. And it kind of set the direction of like, we're going to find hills and we're going to do our best to climb them. And
so talk to me about Russia. What was it? Talk to me about life in Russia.
Life in Russia, what Churchill said, that Russia is a puzzle wrapped inside of a mystery within an enigma.
Oh, God.
He was exactly right. It's more complicated than that, but Russia it's just, the people there were just great. We're on the Far East side, right on the border of China, and the people are very Asian in their hospitality, very open, especially in 1995. The Soviet Union had fallen, the Cold War was over. We thought we were going to have world peace, everybody's going to get along. And so we come in as Americans, and they just opened their arms and welcomed us. And we had great experiences with a lot of people. We actually started a small church, did a lot of things on a college campus, really trying to do for college students there what Craig McGriff and others had done for me at the University of Alabama, and give me some purpose and some focus and answers to the ultimate questions of life. And we were successful in that. This young lady named Lena, I talk about in the book. I named my oldest daughter after her. And so that part was fun. And then there's just crazy adventures. I mean, until you've lived in a place that the temperature never gets above freezing for about 7 to 8 months out of the year, you just don't understand cold.
Yeah, I bet.
Until the high is like minus 10.
But your oldest daughter was born there, right?
No, she was actually born after we came back.
Oh, okay. I was thinking she was born there.
And we named her. We named her after this young lady, and then came home, went to seminary.
Okay.
And we spent a year there. It was a great year. Went to seminary, went back for 2 years, and felt like we'd be there forever.
Okay, gotcha. That you went back over there.
And so
gotcha.
when we went, I was like, I was young at that time, going back at about 28.
Mm-hmm.
And this time I got to go to my in-laws and go, I'm taking your daughter and your grandchild.
Yeah.
And here we go. And this is pre-internet days, 95. When we went there, we spoke with our families like 2 or 3 times, about $6 a minute to call home.
Yeah.
It's kind of a wild place. But then we went back, and my second daughter was born while we were over there.
Okay.
She's actually born in the island nation of Cyprus, but spent 2 years there, and those 2 years were significantly harder.
Yeah.
The Cold War was actually back on. Russian-American relations had fallen significantly, and there was lots of hostility towards us. Where in 95, everybody loved America. In 98, everybody wasn't that excited about America.
Yeah,
And so we had done some things that had really kind of slapped the Russian nation in the face.
As a nation.
And they didn't appreciate it at all.
Yeah.
And so it was much harder. And quite frankly, at the end of it, a former KGB worker named Vladimir Putin ran for president in the year 2000, was elected because the Russian people were so dominated by the Russian mob. They just wanted a strong leader. Just come in and clean the place up. Just the mob is extorting us everywhere. Help us. But when you elect a strong leader like that, they just never go away.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's where they still are right now.
Oh yeah,
right?
he's in his 20th year of a 12-year term.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, that shows you something there. You're listening to The Brainstorm with Matt and Mike. We have Todd Carnes on the show today, talking about his new book, Burying Home, a memoir of a Mill Village missionary. Todd, we were just talking about your time as a missionary over Russia. That came to kind of a screeching halt for you, right? I mean, tell me about the exit out of Russia. Tell me how all of that went down as a missionary. Was that around 98?
So actually, we got there in 98, and in the year 2000, Vladimir Putin was elected.
Right.
And one of the first things he did is start throwing people out of the country. And we were some of those. He didn't throw everybody out, but he targeted our team because of where we were living. We're actually living right near the Ural Mountains, and they have a lot of their intercontinental ballistic missiles hidden in those mountains. And so they always felt like we were CIA. They didn't know I was just a redneck from a small mill town in Alabama, never even met a CIA agent. But anyway, at the end of the day, they came to us and said, we're canceling your visas. You got 5 days to get out of the country. If we see you after that, we will lock you up. And so we called the American embassy because we were young and arrogant and felt like we knew better. We said, hey, listen, we have valid visas. They just told us we got 5 days to get out of the country. Is there anything you can do? And the American consulate worker said, you make sure you fly out on the 4th day, because if your flight is delayed and you stay here on the 6th day, you'll go to jail. There's nothing we can do. So you get tickets on the 4th day, and if you miss it, you fly out on the 5th day, because on the 6th day, you're going to jail. There's nothing we can do. We understood that perfectly. And we got out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there was, we had a team. We had a team of about 10 adults and 6 kids. We had to load up and get out of there quickly.
Yeah.
Flew out to Cyprus and then back home.
Yeah. So then you come down and we we meet a little bit after that, right? Because you came back, and I guess one of your jobs that you recently got after that was the missions pastor over at a church where I was going, and
right.
You and I met, and that's been how long ago?
20 years.
20 years, yeah, multiple, 2 decades ago. So, yeah, and you and I've had a good relationship from there. Though, I really started coming to faith about that same time in which all that was started happening, and then you went over and started really leading a small church plant in the back of I guess a middle school or an elementary school. Elementary school cafeteria called Radius Church, and I followed you over there, because our friendship was strong enough, and I felt like, man, this is a place that needs me and wants me over there. So we're going to go over there and support you, and so your Radius journey was for a long time. How long were you at Radius?
I was there 7 years, and I have a chapter in the book. I call it Faith Steps, and just talk about walking through life and looking for, a lot of people call them challenges. A lot of times they're very challenging, but in my life, since coming to faith at 21, I always found myself with a faith step in front of me that I wanted to take. I wasn't sure I could do it. I felt like God wanted me to do it, but it was nerve-wracking. There's a lot of anxiety. I mean, going to Russia was one, going back was a second. Then we moved here to Lexington, and then I felt like God wanted me to lead a church, and I partnered up with a guy named John Reeves, and he had started a small church and went there. And then after that, kind of took a faith step back in the workplace, and then took a faith step to start a business. And it's just all through life, you kind of have these opportunities to take a faith step. And it's a big part of my story, a big part of your story. Like a lot of us have walked that. And I just want to pass that off to the second generation and say, hey guys, like you're going to have opportunities to take faith steps and do things that are great, but it's not going to be clear.
Yeah.
You're not getting a word direct from God. There's going to be some ambiguity, and you're going to have to exercise faith and believe, and then you can see things happen that are much greater than what you anticipate.
Yeah.
When I went to Radius, I told the guy before I left, I said, if we could put 200 people in the room and really live out the values of Jesus, that would be such a win. And then eventually we got over 1,000 people in the room. It was well beyond what I ever conceived.
Yeah.
But it starts with a little bit of faith.
Right. In the book and in a lot of the stories and conversations you and I've had over the years, we talk about forgiveness. Mm-hmm. And so talk to me a little bit about, and our viewers and our listeners, because I think this is something that resonates in the workplace and the life, in your family life, and
right.
definitely in your childhood life going into your adult life, right? And you could probably sit here and name 100 different times in which you probably should have and didn't offer that grace to people, right?
100%.
And so talk to me a little bit about just forgiveness, as from a definition perspective, I guess.
Yeah, and I think in this is one of the most difficult things in the world. Let's just face it. I mean, God is great at forgiving. Nobody else is great at it. It's hard for all of us. There's a great saying where people say, "I don't want to go to church. It's full of hypocrites." And to that you answer, "No, it's not full. There's room for one more, but you come on in," because we're all hypocrites. And I never feel more hypocritical than when I talk about forgiveness, because I have forgiven some folks. There's also some folks I still need to forgive that I'm trying to forgive. Like I'm always in process because I'm not great at forgiving.
Yeah,
I'm good at retaliation. But forgiveness
and pride's one of the hardest things in the world to get over.
It's tough. And so I'm not an expert at this, but I will say that writing this book, there was something unique for me in it, because I've known the definition of forgiveness. It's when you get to the point that you no longer want to retaliate, you don't want revenge, but you actually want the best for that person. And I don't know that I've gotten there with a lot of people who've wounded me, but when you get to the point where you just want the best. And so I wrote this memoir, and I was thinking, this is my memoir, and I really want people to understand where I come from and the dynamics there. And quite frankly, I never even considered writing this book until the generation above me was gone. Because I would never want to really just expose a lot of my journey and things that happened while my parents or grandparents were alive, because a lot of it's tragic. And so I was, once we were there, then still you're kind of on the bubble of like what I want to share, but I want to share my story because I feel like it can pull some people towards things that are good and holy and forgiveness. And so when I got to the end, I realized I was talking about my dad, and actually the person who edited my book, I was trying to think of a title, and I said, I sat down to write my memoir, but when I got done, I figured out this might just be a book about me and my dad.
Yeah.
Because dads are just that big in life. But the beautiful thing is at the end, I realized that I got to a point of forgiveness. And I don't even know that I could articulate that or recognize that until I put it down on paper and wrote it. And it was this cool thing. Like when I wrote it, I was relieved.
No, that's definitely, there's no doubt about it. And I know there's a lot of folks out there that, include myself, that's had, issues with their dad, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. And so I can understand that. Hey, for our viewers and listeners, before I forget to ask you this in a minute, where can they go to buy this book?
Yeah, certainly. Go to BearingHome.com. You can go to BearingHome.com and you can get the book there. It'll be out on Amazon and out on Barnes & Noble, and we're going to launch right in the middle of November.
Yep.
And so, by all means.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Check that book out. So if you had to advise in a short period of time, just a minute-long deal, somebody wants to write a book, what would you recommend to them? How to go about it?
I would say certainly you don't have to know the end from the beginning. I didn't really know where I was going until I got there. So just start with what you know and begin to put it on paper, and it actually builds momentum. And as you build momentum, you'll go and find yourself at the place where you need to end up, and then get ready for a long editing process.
Okay.
Because you're just continually editing, getting more people to look at it and trying to get it in the right order. That's the really tedious process.
Yeah.
But the satisfaction, there's an emotional thing when this book comes in the mail.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain, especially when it's a memoir, a biography. It's the culmination of a lot of work, and you're holding it right there in your hands.
Yeah.
And there's just, no matter what happens with it, there's just a lot of pride in that I finished the course and I've got something here that's already benefited my kids greatly. And quite frankly, what I want it to do is I want it to give me opportunities to speak through the book and to speak from stages and to speak in multiple areas, like some of the opportunities I get with civic groups, chambers of commerce, churches, to talk about our roots, talk about what it means to bury home, talk about forgiveness, talk about some of these deep issues that matter.
Yeah. You're listening to the Brainstorm Radio with Matt and Mike. Go to thebrainstormradio.com and subscribe to our podcast and our YouTube channel. Todd, I'm excited about this book. I'm excited about reading this book. Buy this book, guys. Go on. If you grew up in any type of small town, this book is probably going to resonate with you.
Yeah.
Especially any type of small rural type of town across the country, United States. This book right here will resonate with you. If you haven't, and other people around you grew up that way, but you didn't, and you've always wondered what life was like that, then this book will resonate with you there too.
Right.
And so I'm excited about this book, and contact Todd. Contact Todd Carnes on BearingHome.com. Order one. He'll grab one and sign it for you through the Contact Us form there. He'll sign it for you and send it to you. If you ever need a great speaker to speak about all types of things, you can also go to BearingHome.com and look at his speaking engagement opportunities, and he'll come out. He's a dynamic speaker. Every time he comes out to, it's hard to get him locally here, but every time he comes out to like the local chamber, Lexington or Columbia or something of that nature, I know that it's a packed room. Great friend of mine, Todd Carnes. Thank you very much for joining me on the show today.
Great to be here, man. Appreciate it.
Bud.